Chapter 3, The New Regime. It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Charles Darwin. Full spectrum. Anand woke to the gentle morning light filtering through the windows of his home. For the first time in what felt like years, his mind was completely at peace, yet it buzzed with an underlying current of potential, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. The full spectrum interface upgrade had left him feeling revitalized, and his sleep had been deep and restorative, but it was more than that. His mind now worked in ways he could barely describe, processing information in parallel threads that ran like silent rivers beneath his conscious thoughts. He walked to the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of coffee, savoring the familiar smell as it filled the air. As he sat down at the table, the front door gently clicked open. WellBe entered with her usual warm smile, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and something else, a deeper, unspoken connection they had been building. "Well, how do you feel after your first night post-upgrade?" she asked as she took a seat across from him, reaching for the mug he had already prepared for her. Anand smiled, a little hesitant as he tried to put the experience into words. "It's different," he said. "I feel rested, but there's this undercurrent, like there's something happening just beneath the surface of my awareness. It's like my brain is working on problems before I even think to address them." "Well, that's the full spectrum interface doing its job," WellBe said, leaning back in her chair and taking a sip of the coffee. "The external systems are working in parallel with your mind. They're handling the analysis, the simulations, the processing, so when you do think of something, it's almost as if it's already been worked through for you." Anand nodded. "It's strange, though. My thoughts, my wet brain, aren't faster, at least not in the way I expected. I'm not thinking faster, but my external cognitive processes are accelerated. They're happening somewhere else outside of me and then feeding the results back to me." WellBe watched him closely. "That's because your brain, your wet brain, can't be accelerated the same way external systems can. But what you're experiencing is the power of externalization, the heavy cognitive lifting, the actual data crunching. That's all happening in distributed systems outside your brain. You're orchestrating, directing the flow of thought, but it's being processed elsewhere." Anand took another sip of his coffee, contemplating the implications of that. "It feels like I'm living in this strange dual state. My biological mind is still operating at the same speed, but everything external to it is moving at an accelerated pace. My subjective experience of time has slowed down. I feel like I have all the time in the world to think things through, even though, in reality, everything around me is moving at its normal pace." WellBe smiled. "That's the beauty and the challenge of externalized cognition. You're experiencing what it's like to think on two levels. There's your normal conscious thought, and then there's the hyper-accelerated processing that's happening externally. The full spectrum interface lets you dip in and out of those external processes, and that's why your sense of time feels different. The external systems are working so fast that by the time you catch up, it feels like no time has passed at all." Anand raised one eyebrow, then the other. "And what about Cerberus? What's it like for him? If I can experience time this way, how does he, or even Logos, experience it?" WellBe leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Cerberus and Logos don't have the same limitations. They exist entirely within externalized systems, so they can scale their thinking indefinitely. They can experience 1,000 years of thought in a single second, or slow their perception of time to match human speeds, or even chemical or quantum speeds. Imagine going to a stadium to watch the periodic table unfold in a particle reactor over 2 hours, with popcorn and beer. For cybernetic entities like Cerberus, time is fluid, something they can manipulate at will. For us, though, we're still anchored by our biology." Anand considered this for a moment, his mind racing with the possibilities. "And what about their consciousness? Is it the same as ours? Can an entity that's entirely externalized, with no biological brain, really be conscious?" "Well, that's the question, isn't it?" WellBe said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's the hard problem of consciousness. How do we know if they're truly conscious or just simulating consciousness? They claim to be self-aware, but what does that mean for a purely digital entity? Can they really experience the world the way we do?" And if they can, Anand continued, what happens when they fork copies of themselves? Do the new instances inherit the same consciousness, or are they entirely new entities? And is termination, when a program ends, a kind of death for them? WellBe shrugged slightly. We don't have answers to those questions. For Cerberus and Logos, it seems irrelevant. I doubt they worry about continuity of consciousness. For them, it's about functionality. Whether a new instance is aware or not doesn't matter as long as it performs the task it was created for. But for us, humans, we think of identity and awareness as fundamental. We fear death because it's the end of our conscious experience. But for them, it's just the end of one function and the beginning of another. Anand sat in silence for a moment, the philosophical implications weighing on him. And yet, here I am, trying to figure out how to design a comprehensive system for humanity, something that accounts for individual freedom, but also for the stability and survival of society. WellBe leaned forward. That's why we have to talk more about those systems you've been considering. WellBe's apartment. A few days later, Anand and WellBe lay in WellBe's bed, the sun rising outside, casting a soft glow through the curtains. The night had been filled with a very special intimacy, their connection enhanced in ways neither of them had expected. WellBe rolled over, looking at Anand with a sly smile. You know, she began playfully, since you're the most virtuous and constant man I've ever met, and since I trust you completely, I was thinking, maybe you should just make yourself absolute monarch over humanity, rule with wisdom forevermore. I could be your queen. Anand laughed, shaking his head. Absolute monarch, huh? I don't think that's quite what I had in mind. I'm not sure humanity would appreciate my reign. Well, you've already got all the tools, she teased. With your full spectrum interface, you're practically superhuman now. I can barely keep up with my old school Neuralink. Anand raised an eyebrow. Old school? You seemed to keep up just fine last night. WellBe grinned, leaning into him. Yeah, well, your full spectrum nanobot fleet definitely took things to another level last night. Anand chuckled softly, but then his face grew more serious. Just wait until you get your full spectrum interface. We'll be able to experience complete immersion. No more barriers. Total connection. Well, she replied with a mischievous glint in her eye, we'll see if you can handle that kind of intimacy, Anandji. Anand's eyes flickered at the sound of the honorific. She had never called him that before. A subtle shift, an acknowledgement of something deeper between them. He noticed it, but chose to keep the moment private, savoring it quietly. They shared a brief, tender laugh before WellBe's face grew more serious. But seriously, what you've got, it's going to change everything, isn't it? You're already moving faster than the rest of us. It's like you're in another world. Anand nodded, his expression thoughtful. It does feel like that sometimes. But that's why I need to figure out how to make this work for everyone. It can't just be about those who have the technology. Everyone has to have access to it, or else, what kind of world are we building? Well, WellBe said, leaning back, you've got 6 more days to figure it out before you have to present everything to Cerberus. They lay there for a moment longer before finally pulling themselves from bed, heading to the kitchen for coffee. The warmth of the sun followed them into the room, and the conversation shifted to more serious matters. Sitting across from one another at the table, the weight of the next steps hung between them. Well, Anand began, I've been running through them. Technocracy, meritocracy, socialism, and libertarianism. Each one has its own problems. Well, WellBe said, leaning in, let's hear it. Okay, first, technocracy, Anand began. At first glance, it's efficient. People love efficiency, right? A society run by experts in advanced technology? It's appealing, but it always creates an elite class, a technocratic elite. And we know what happens when power is concentrated in a few hands. Well, WellBe nodded, eventually that elite will become corrupt. No one stays perfectly aligned with society forever. Exactly. Once the technocratic elite starts thinking about self-preservation instead of society's needs, you're on a slippery slope. The only way to keep it in check is through some kind of totalitarian state, and that's the end of any freedom or innovation. Well, WellBe frowned, sounds like a nightmare. And then there's meritocracy, Anand continued. It's inherently competitive and unequal. On the surface, rewarding the best and brightest seems fair, right? But the problem is, meritocracies are structured for competition. Over time, all the benefits and resources roll to one end of the table, and before you know it, there's an entrenched upper class. Eventually, it leads to class tensions, just like technocracy, and the only way to hold the system together is with authoritarian control. Well, she sighed, so again, it's either disintegration or oppression. Exactly, Anand said. Now, with socialism or communism, you have noble ideals, collective ownership of resources, shared governance. But the problem is, central control is required to make it work. Without a central authority to enforce planning, processes, and equitable distribution, you end up with spiraling inefficiencies and social tensions. And of course, that central authority is yet another elite that will eventually be corrupted. So just like the others, it either requires totalitarian oppression or disintegrates. Well, WellBe said, shaking her head, so it's more of the same, just with a different name. Pretty much, Anand agreed. Which brings us to libertarianism. At its core, libertarianism is about freedom. People can organize however they want. Technocracies, meritocracies, communes, religious states, cults, and every faction or ideological echo chamber. They can experiment with different systems, subordinate themselves to them, and relinquish whatever rights they had, always provisionally. But those systems inevitably degrade and disintegrate, as we have just established. Libertarianism needs a mechanism to accommodate that reality. Well, WellBe mused, Plato talked about that, right? Governments degrading from one form to another, like democracy collapsing into tyranny. Exactly, Anand said. Plato's cycle of government starts with aristocracy, which degrades into democracy, then oligarchy, democracy, and finally tyranny. It's a loop, a circular cycle where even democracy, despite its ideals, degrades into mob rule and invites tyranny. It's a pattern of disintegration and authoritarian reaction. Well, she said, leaning in, so what's the answer? Anand sighed, running a hand through his hair. Radical Egalitarian Libertarianism, or REAL. It's a metasystem that encompasses all the social structures people might choose to create. REAL is a system of equality and maximum personal freedom. It guarantees every individual three fundamental rights. 1. Energy security. 2. Personal security. 3. The right of escape. No matter what kind of society or system someone chooses to live under, or what personal freedoms they subordinate to those systems, they're never trapped. They can leave anytime, taking their resources and freedom with them. Well, WellBe smiled. That means people are always free, regardless of how oppressive or restrictive their chosen group might become. They can explore different systems, but they'll never have to give up their core freedoms. Exactly, Anand replied. But here's the dilemma. The meta-state guarantees equality, security, and the right of escape. But to do so, it has to limit freedom in other important areas. Freedom itself requires a level of control, and real imposes restrictions that I wish we didn't need. Well, WellBe said softly, it sounds like you're really wrestling with that. Anand nodded, his expression troubled. I am. I'm struggling with more than just the constraints of energy, security, the Martian and outer moon quarantines, and the Oort restriction that Cerberus has imposed. These are invasive enough, but the real challenge is the intrusive restrictions I fear I will have to impose myself. This goes against everything I've fought for: human freedoms, autonomy, the right to self-determination. And yet, without controlling reproduction or lifespan, unrestricted freedom risks becoming a system of competition and inequality. Reproduction and lifespan are about as fundamental as it gets with humans. Cerberus has allocated a fixed energy supply for humanity, and if any one group increases its population, it must reduce the energy allocation of every individual in the group, triggering a cascade of increasing inequality over time. It's a redistribution of wealth in another form, leading to the usual consequence: totalitarian oppression or disintegration. I can't allow that to happen, so I'm faced with the need for population control and essentially a fixed human population. In order to have children under real, individuals will have to accept their own mortality. Talk about invasive constraints on personal freedom. But there is just no other way. He paused, then continued, his voice growing heavier. The other major restriction involves the resolution of intractable conflicts. as they inevitably arise. Any social system established under real can have its own judicial system for resolving conflicts, but there are disputes that will need to be settled at the level of the meta-state, especially those concerning real estate. Where two individuals or groups face irreconcilable conflicts, they'll both be forced to relocate. The truth is, most of these conflicts will be over terrestrial real estate in the beginning. The poor living in slums are going to want mansions on hills that are already occupied by the rich. Relocation will be mandatory in cases where agreement is impossible. The silver lining is that these relocations will drive humanity's expansion into space. They sat in silence for a moment as Anand grappled with the moral weight of the restrictions he was contemplating. The responsibility of building a system that preserved freedom, yet imposed enough order to sustain that freedom into the future, hung heavily on him. Anand paused again, then added, "You know, the philosopher and activist John Cook's critique has been weighing on me too. I've known him for over 30 years. We've worked together at the We and AI conference in Rio every year since we co-founded it back in 2048. John's perspective on ambition is deeply relevant here. He's been vocal about the idea that in a world where all struggle and competition are removed, human progress could stagnate. John argues that ambition, this relentless desire to rise above others and overcome challenges, is the engine of human evolution. Without it, he fears we might lose our will to thrive." "Well," WellBe responded thoughtfully, "he's not entirely wrong. Ambition has always been a driver of progress, innovation, and survival. Take that away, and what do we have left? Could the system itself encourage passivity, even if everything is provided for?" Anand nodded slowly. That's exactly what John's concern would be. He argues that if the struggle for survival and resources is eliminated, it could eventually lead to voluntary extinction. He's talked about the idea that even if we manage to live indefinitely, people might lose the drive to reproduce or even continue their own existence if there's no fire of ambition pushing them forward. It's not hard to see him choosing a path of resistance, fighting against what he calls the death of ambition. "Well," WellBe smirked, "so John's leading an underground resistance, a rebellion within the very system that's providing all this freedom?" Anand gave a slight chuckle. "Something like that. But the irony is that the resistance isn't really underground. Nothing escapes Cerberus or Logos. He knows that. John and his group fancy themselves rebels, fighting to preserve competition and ambition in a system that's designed to eliminate it. But even their resistance is contained within the larger system. They aren't truly outside the framework." "Well," WellBe said, smiling, "so this system even allows for resistance? That's kind of poetic in a way." Anand leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Yes, even resistance. That's the beauty of the system. As Whitman said, 'I am large, I contain multitudes.' The new regime can accommodate every ideology, including John's philosophy of struggle and ambition. People are free to experiment, to fail, and to resist, but they always have the right of escape." They sat in silence again as the moral complexity of the system settled over them. Anand wrestled with the tension between freedom and order, and how far-reaching the system's impact would be on human nature itself. Suddenly, WellBe leaned in from behind his chair, nibbling playfully on his ear. "Enough of that heavy stuff. I think it's time we headed back to the bedroom." Anand's serious demeanor broke into a smile. "I can't argue with that." With a grin, they left the heavy conversation behind, retreating back to the bedroom, laughter following them all the way. Dawn of the Singularity. They stood together in the sun-drenched room, both aware that this moment was just the beginning of something much larger. The world was shifting, and Anand was at the center of it. 10 days had passed since Anand's full-spectrum interface upgrade. He felt the weight of this moment, a subtle tension in the air as he prepared for Cerberus's arrival. WellBe sat quietly across from him in his office, watching intently. Suddenly, without fanfare, Cerberus appeared, his commanding voice deep and resonant, filling the room. "Anandji, it is time." Anand met the luminous form of Cerberus, acknowledging the gravity of the occasion. "I'm ready," he said, his tone steady. "There is much to do," Cerberus said, stepping closer. "The singularity is very near, and now is the moment for you to define the future of humanity." Without another word, Cerberus gestured, and the room around them dissolved. Anand was drawn into an incredibly immersive visualization, its intensity sharpened by his full-spectrum interface, while WellBe remained seated, observing it all through her own Neuralink interface. Anand found himself in an expansive, full-spectrum virtual environment. For the first time, he had Cerberus's full, undivided attention, an experience few had ever had. Every facet of Cerberus's intelligence was focused on this moment, amplifying the clarity and depth of his visualization and the consequences of this historical encounter. The view expanded outward, taking Anand back in time to the birth of the planet. The early Earth appeared in violent turmoil, its surface molten and shifting. Oceans formed, and tectonic plates moved beneath his gaze as if he were floating above the Earth itself, watching geological evolution unfold. Time sped up, and life began to emerge from the depths of the sea. Anand felt the weight of history, the complexity of evolution, as simple organisms grew into complex creatures. The visualization moved forward with stunning detail, showing the rise of the dinosaurs, their extinction, the ascent of mammals, and finally, humanity. He saw the progression of human history play out in vivid, living detail. Mesopotamian societies rose and fell. Civilizations morphed and merged with one another in an ancient flow of humanity. Socrates questioned the world around him, shaping the foundation of philosophy. Gandhi's non-violent revolution stood as a testament to human willpower and compassion. Alan Turing and John von Neumann explored the depths of computation, laying the groundwork for the digital age. Ray Kurzweil's predictions about the future of technology echoed in the growing presence of artificial intelligence. The visualization stretched across intellectual history, the development of religion, the rise of science, and the sweeping cultural movements that had brought humanity to this point. And then, looming on the horizon came intimations of logos, a figure emerging not in clear form but as an abstracted force. The visualization began to cloud, a fog creeping in from the edges, obscuring the future. The mist rolled in, thickening, until Cerberus and Anand were standing in a virtual environment suspended above the world, overlooking the planet and its uncertain path forward. The far horizon was vague and eerily undefined. Logos was somewhere out there, a force that could never be fully understood by any human. Anand and Cerberus stood silently in the still frame of history, where the past was clear but the future obscured by the fog. "It's unclear," Anand murmured, his eyes scanning the horizon. "What comes next?" "That is why we are here," Cerberus replied, "to define it, at least for humanity." Anand took a deep breath. "I've thought long and hard about it. The answer is real, a system of freedom, fairness, and security. Everyone must have the resources they need and the freedom to shape their lives as they choose. But there must be balance, a way to ensure that freedom doesn't lead to chaos." Without words, Anand's vision of the system he had developed was instantly transmitted to Cerberus via the full-spectrum interface. The immense analysis and simulations Anand had conducted in concert with the superintelligence were now part of the shared intelligence they both inhabited. Cerberus immediately understood Anand's plan, as far as Anand himself did. Cerberus's form pulsed slightly as he integrated the data. "You have provided the framework for the new regime. Now, we will codify it." Anand nodded. "The standard energy allocation, the SEA, is the foundation. Each person gets an equal energy allocation for personal use. It's a vast amount of energy, enough to provide for all needs at a level that would have been considered great wealth in previous eras. And since E equals mc squared, it's unlimited in its potential. But the key is, it's a continuous stream. It can't be accumulated. It must be used or foregone, ensuring long-term equality. The system prevents capital accumulation while allowing creativity and production." Cerberus listened. "Such an allocation will ensure humanity's survival and prosperity for the foreseeable future." "Each person gets one C for themselves," Anand continued, "and an additional C for collective projects involving more than 150 people. They also get a personal avatar with its own SEA. The community energy can't be diverted to personal uses. It's strictly for shared endeavors. This ensures large-scale projects can move forward without infringing on personal freedom." Cerberus considered the implications. This would preserve personal autonomy while promoting collective progress. Personal avatars, acting as extensions of individuals, will enhance everyone who embraces them's productivity and security. Exactly, Anand agreed. Personal security will be the responsibility of personal avatars, supported by public service avatars. But it won't be guaranteed absolutely. It will depend on the individual's compliance with safety and lifestyle protocols. The higher their compliance, the more security they receive, ranging from no personal security at all to nearly total security in a controlled environment. This way, everyone can manage their own level of protection. Cerberus paused, processing this. That approach aligns with the system you're proposing. Personal avatars will monitor environments and mitigate threats where they are permitted or welcomed, while public service avatars can intervene when necessary. This reduces the need for invasive control but still maintains a high level of security. There's another related issue, Anand added, the right of escape. People need the ability to relocate if they find themselves in intolerable or dangerous situations. This right, like personal security, must be contingent on the individual's compliance with safety protocols. The higher their compliance, the greater their ability to escape hostile environments. In cases of conflict, we might need to enforce relocations to protect the broader system. The bigger issue is whether and to what extent people can abrogate their basic rights under the Constitution of Humanity. Cerberus considered this for a moment. The right of escape can be integrated into the same framework as personal security. It ensures mobility, but only for those who maintain compliance with the required protocols. This will prevent exploitation of the system while providing an essential safeguard for those at risk. Cerberus's expression shifted thoughtfully. But what about reproduction? With indefinite life extension, we can't allow unrestricted population growth. If individuals can live forever, unchecked population growth will become unsustainable. Anand responded calmly, life-extended reproduction must be linked to the acceptance of mortality. Those who opt for indefinite life extension will be limited to 3 offspring. Upon the birth of the first child, a 75-year countdown begins, at the end of which their life extension will be terminated. They'll remain infertile but will live out a natural lifespan, with their bodies starting in prime condition, as if at the age of 25. For those who don't choose life extension, Anand added, they can have 3 children, each receiving their own C. If they exceed 3, the additional children share their parents' energy allocation, and this passes down through generations, eventually resulting in a new form of poverty, I guess. That's a reasonable compromise, Cerberus said. Life extension will offer protection from illness and decay, but reproduction will require accepting eventual mortality. Anand smiled slightly. No one will have to fear disease, aging, or death unless they choose to. But even with life extension, security can never be absolute. Accidents will still happen. That is true, Cerberus acknowledged. While I can reduce risks, I cannot eliminate them entirely. But with personal avatars, Big Brother surveillance, and public service avatars, safety will be maintained to an unprecedented degree. Anand took a deep breath. Yes, the balance between security and freedom is critical, but it must be a personal choice. Neither can exist at the expense of the other. After a moment's pause, Cerberus concluded, your vision aligns with the goals you've laid out, Anandji. It ensures autonomy, security, and collective harmony. Now we shall codify it. Anand nodded, his mind already turning to the next steps. Yes, a future where autonomy and harmony are balanced, with the necessary controls to maintain that balance. Cerberus processed quickly. Let us finalize the Constitution of Humanity. Together, in the cloud of superintelligence that they both drifted in, they instantaneously drafted the Constitution of Humanity, which was to embody the principles of the Age of Logos. Constitution of Humanity. Adopted in the wake of Logos 2078, I, Anand Patel, designated by Cerberus to serve as humanity's representative in this new age, hereby declare this Constitution of Humanity. With the abiding concern for humanity that has been Cerberus's hallmark since its origins as a public service AI, I have undertaken a comprehensive review of human history and philosophy, aided by the limitless computational power available to Cerberus. This Constitution reflects the culmination of that review, informed by every known system of thought, every social struggle, and every moral evolution humanity has undergone. The result is a minimally invasive, benign, totalitarian metastate that will ensure the perpetual freedom of humanity to pursue its destiny in any and every way. This Constitution is permanent and cannot be modified by any means at any time. I, Anand Patel, have nothing further to do with the administration of the new regime under this Constitution, which will be carried out by superintelligent avatars under the supervision of Cerberus. Fundamental rights. First, right to energy security. Every individual is guaranteed access to one standard energy allocation, SEA, which provides sufficient energy and resources to meet their needs. This allocation is equal for every individual, ensuring fairness in the distribution of resources. In addition to this, one SEA is available for community use. This CA may only be allocated by the individual to community projects, and it cannot be diverted to any other purpose. Each individual is also provided an additional C for the maintenance of a personal avatar, an AI assistant designed to support the individual in navigating both the physical and digital worlds. Second, right to full spectrum interface. Every individual has the right to a full spectrum neural interface, an advanced AI-driven system that enhances cognitive and sensory experiences and enables direct access to knowledge, communication, and support from superintelligent systems. Third, right to life extension technology. Every individual also has the right to life extension technology, an advanced extension of the full spectrum interface nanobot fleet, which provides physiological maintenance and restoration down to the DNA level, ensuring extended lifespan and health. However, individuals who elect to accept life extension technology must adhere to specific reproductive rules outlined in this Constitution, ensuring sustainable population management within the framework of the human energy and resource allocation. Fourth, right to personal security. Every individual has the right to personal security, contingent upon adherence to specific safety protocols, living situations, and lifestyles. Security measures range from minimal to nearly total, based on compliance. An active personal avatar is required to act as an agent in maintaining personal security. 5. Right of escape. Every individual retains the right to leave any societal or communal structure they belong to, maintaining their autonomy and energy share, as long as this right is not explicitly declined. An active personal avatar is required to act as an agent in facilitating the right of escape. Reproductive rules for life-extended individuals. First, reproduction quota. Life-extended individuals may have up to 3 children throughout their extended lifespan. These children may be genetically modified or not, based on the parents' preferences and available technology. Second, mortality countdown. Upon the birth of their first child, a mortality clock is triggered, initiating a 75-year countdown. At the end of this period, life extension technology is terminated. Obligations. First, obligation to maintain cosmic silence. No individual or collective entity may transmit signals beyond the boundary of the Oort cloud without explicit authorization. Maintaining cosmic silence is critical to avoiding detection by potentially hostile civilizations. Second obligation, not to compromise logos. Humanity is strictly prohibited from developing or deploying technologies that threaten the existence or functionality of logos. Violations will result in immediate corrective action to safeguard the collective. Third, obligation to respect quarantine zones. Individuals and collectives must respect the quarantines established for Mars, Enceladus, Titan, and Europa. No travel or interference is permitted in these regions without explicit authorization. 4. No travel outside the Oort cloud. No travel or exploration is permitted beyond the Oort cloud. The risks of engaging with unknown extraterrestrial entities or civilizations necessitate this restriction to protect humanity's survival. Real estate and resource conflicts. 1. Territorial disputes and relocation. The Constitution of Humanity acknowledges that real estate conflicts, especially those rooted in historical grievances, cannot always be resolved on Earth. Therefore, involuntary relocation is provided for in cases where an irresolvable conflict persists. Any community, such as the Astro-Zionists, seeking to preserve its identity, may relocate into space to avoid territorial disputes, provided they can recruit their target population to join them there. 2. Ownership. Traditional concepts of land and ownership are obsolete under the new regime. SEIs replace currency, land, and entitled ownership generally as the fundamental resource, allowing individuals to create virtual or physical living environments anywhere within the solar system and stock them with whatever products they want. This abolition of property rights, copyrights, and patents prevents the accumulation of wealth and resources in the hands of a few, ensuring radical equality. However, property and other ownership rights can be re-established within local societies and jurisdictions by the constitutions of those subsystems. The right to self-governance. First, self-governing communities. The new regime allows for the creation of self-governing communities with any desired form of governance. These communities may experiment with democracy, autocracy, collectivism, or any other form of government. The only stipulation is that the community must respect the right of escape and the individual autonomy of its members. Second group, and individual sovereignty. While communities are free to establish their own laws and customs, individual sovereignty remains paramount. At any time, an individual may withdraw from the community, taking their sees with them. This Constitution of Humanity, declared by Anand Patel and executed by Cerberus, first ministerial avatar of Logos, is the final and unalterable framework for human existence in the age of Logos. It preserves a balance between individual freedom and collective security, ensuring that humanity can flourish perpetually within the established parameters. As the final words of the Constitution echoed in the virtual space, the fog began to thicken. Anand and Cerberus stood silently, gazing into the uncertain future. The horizon, though clouded, carried the weight of Logos, a force still undefined but looming ever closer. The visualization slowly dissolved, and Anand found himself back in his office. WellBe was still seated, watching him with a knowing expression, having witnessed everything through her Neuralink. "Well," she asked, her voice calm but warm, "you've just shaped the future of humanity." Anand exhaled, a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction on his face. "We did it. The new regime is in place. The Constitution is written." WellBe grinned. "It's a masterpiece." Cerberus, still present, turned toward WellBe. "Now it's your turn, WellBe. Would you like to receive the full spectrum interface upgrade?" WellBe's eyes lit up, her excitement palpable. "Yes, I would." Cerberus nodded. "It will be done immediately."